Welcome, welcome, welcome to the show. I'm Vic. I'm going to be interviewing Dr. John Demartini. He is a leading human behavioral specialist, critically acclaimed author, business consultant who uses research-supported methodologies to facilitate dramatic human development in all areas. Dr. John Demartini was 17, a high school dropout, unable to read or write when he met a 93-year-old man called Paul Bragg. Yes, the Bragg of amino acids that you all know. And I actually had a good fortune of hanging out. I was a yoga teacher way back in, and Patricia Bragg was one of our students in the retreats that we used to run in Mexico. Long, long time ago, but I love Patricia Bragg, and I love the whole Bragg family. And Paul Bragg was able to catalyze a profound transformation by assisting John to awaken an inspired vision of becoming a philosopher and a teacher. And now he spans the globe. He's teaching all the time. He has influenced banks, businesses, governments, and everyone around you. Welcome, Dr. John Demartini. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Great introduction. Thank you.
So you're in Houston, Texas at the moment, and you just finished doing a retreat, a synchronicity retreat in Australia. Isn't it amazing how the world has become like an oyster? It's like anywhere you are in the world, you can reach anywhere in the world.
It is inspiring. I mean, technology was emerging and we were introducing ourselves to it as we were going along, but COVID kind of expedited that process, as probably many people faced. And I'm very grateful. I've been blessed to reach people in most countries around the world because of the technology today. So I can't complain. I think that that's a great gift.
And so how many books have you written? And a number of them are already bestsellers. How many books total have you written? I can't keep track of the count.
That's a good question. If I add all the, like I'm writing a book right now in philosophy that's about 1,200 pages, close to 300 if I put all the manuscripts and textbooks and those together. Self-help books is probably around 40, but the ones that I do for conferences and larger texts is nearly 300.
And so you were also in the film The Secret. And what was that like, being part of that film? And like, did it help sell more books?
You know, I was speaking the year before The Secret came out. I did 286 speeches in that year, and I was averaging around 300 a year. When The Secret came out, the next 2 years it went up to about 380, and then 426, and then it went back down to around 350. So we had a spike in presentations. I'm sure there was curiosity about books. We definitely had a bit of increase in the book sales and things of that nature, but people were curious. And so if I was somewhere or wherever I was, it seemed like people would get kind of curious and they'd want me to come and do a presentation. So yeah, it was definitely a boost, and it was lovely to be part of the team. And I think that everybody had a different idea of what The Secret was about, and we all got to individually share the secret behind the secret, left out of the secret kind of stuff, presentations.
Yeah, and what is that? Because you speak a lot about values. I actually have your book here about values. It's one of my favorite books of yours. That, you know, it feels like The Secret only works if you're aligned with your highest values, and that was the secret that was left out of The Secret.
Yeah, I think is my they're a bit of a blur. I think there's better, oh, maybe not. People have a set of priorities in their life, a set of values in their life, things that are most to least important in their life. Whenever they set goals and intentions that are aligned and congruent with what they value most, they are spontaneously inspired intrinsically to take action to fulfill them. But when they are doing something that they think they should do, ought to do, supposed to do, got to do, have to do, must do, from some injected value from some collective or individual authorities around them, and something that's lower on their value list, they will require extrinsic motivation to get them to do it and to sustain doing it. A reward if they do it, a punishment if they don't, in order to sustain it. So we maximize our potential when we live congruently and authentically to what we value most. Our ontological identity revolves around what we value most. Our epistemological learning revolves around it, and our teleological purpose revolves around what we value most. So identifying that and structuring your life to fill that, and to prioritize your life and delegate lower priority things and do something that is remunerated in the highest area, is one of the keys to a self-actualized, fulfilled life.
That's wonderful. And so what would you say is that the written word, what impact and what effect has the written word had on your life?
In a sense of reading, or just me writing out what I want to create in life, or in what capacity?
I would say reading as well as writing.
Well,
you recommended this great book here. I have both volumes. I saw your stream on LinkedIn, The Great Ideas.
Well, those two books by Mortimer Adler,
yeah,
I would consider two great volumes that any human being who wants to have a PhD in mastery of life can start with. There's two extraordinary books. When I was 18 years old and I left Hawaii, and I struggled as a child learning. I didn't really read till I was 18. With the help of a dictionary and my mom, we would work on memorizing 30 words a day and learning them and pronouncing them, spelling the words and putting them into a sentence. And I grew my vocabulary enough to eventually pass school and return to school. Once I learned that I could read, because I didn't think I was going to when I was young, because I had learning problems, I couldn't stop. And to this day, I mean, I probably read already at least a book since I've been up this morning. I didn't go to bed till 7 a.m. and I was up at 12. So I've already read a book today, and I sometimes knock out numerous books in a day, but I live reading and standing on the shoulders of great ideas. I don't like to read superficial stuff. I like to read the greatest ideas from the greatest minds from around the world. Because if you fill your mind with great thoughts, great ideas, you have a higher probability of doing something great with your life. So garbage in, garbage out, or profound wisdom going in, you have more likely to do something that leaves an impact around. So I read every day. I love it. And it has a massive impact on my life. And also, I believe that the spoken word, as soon as you take in information that you learn, standing on the shoulders of giants, and then give it out and share it, it tends to be inculcated and tends to be integrated into your life more effectively, and you tend to retain it and use it. So I try to reduce the time between input and output, because it increases the longevity of the knowledge that I get to apply. So then that impacts how I articulate the intentions of my life. And I'm a firm believer in master planning your life and living by design, not by duty. If we don't fill our day with high priority actions that inspire us, our day tends to fill up with low priority distractions that don't. So living by design is taking command of how you fill your day, and living by default and by duty is the inculcation of all of the people projecting their values onto you and asking you to do things that scatter you. So you have to take command and value your time if you want the world to value.
Yeah, I love that, John. What advice would you have to aspiring best-selling authors? A lot of people who watch our show and will be watching this interview are either already best-selling authors or are about to become best-selling authors. So what advice would you have for people who aspire to be best-selling authors?
You know, in myself, I can't say that I went out to be a best-selling author. I figured that I would just create perennials, something that would stand the test of time and over time would eventually sell and kind of build a brand. I never went out and said, okay, I'm now going to make this a bestseller. That wasn't my focus. I just looked inside what I wanted to share, and I tried to share it. I remember chatting with Wayne Dyer many, many years ago in 1983, I think, or 84 or something like that. We were lecturing together in Chicago back then. And I talked to him about how he did some of his best-selling books. And he said, some of the books I went out to try to make a bestseller, others I just wanted to express what was inside me. He said the ones that were deeply meaningful to me inside me over the long haul had the biggest impact. The rest of them were splashes and then not as long-term impacts. So I pretty well stuck to that. And I just wrote what's deeply meaningful, that I really believed it would be of service from the needs that I saw people yearning to want to get. And if I match the needs and I persevere in my speaking and delivering and radio and television, I mean, I think I've done 9,000 interviews. So I constantly get out there and expose myself. So I reach people and share messages. So all I can say is that if you really want to be a best-selling author, that's not been my priority, but to be a best-selling author, I think, is make it if you have a real yearning to want to make a difference on the planet, go out and make the difference. Take every advantage of radio, television, newspapers, podcasts, Clubhouse, every social media, every written material. I've written articles in 1,500 newspapers and magazines around the world. I constantly am writing. So I just expose myself. The best way I can say is, if you care about humanity, you'll do whatever you can to serve it.
And so, John, what is the most important message that you would like to share with the world?
Well, there's lots of those, but probably that the magnificence of who you are is far greater than any fantasy that you'll impose on yourself through the comparison of yourself to somebody else that you've got on a pedestal. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, envy is ignorance and imitation is suicide. Don't be second at somebody else. Be first at being you. The second we compare ourselves to others and put them on pedestals or put them in pits, we tend to inject their values or project our values and expect ourselves to live in their values or expect others to live in our values, both of which are futile. But if we actually live by our highest values, we're more resilient, objective, and adaptable, and we're more likely to have equity between ourselves and others and love them. And when we can respect them and love them, we can communicate what is meaningful to us in terms of what's meaningful to them, and we have the greatest impact. And we're able to sustain our own equanimity and authenticity by doing so. So giving ourselves permission to be ourselves. I think it was Emerson said, if you're a cat trying to swim like a fish, you'll beat yourself up. If you're a fish trying to climb a tree like a cat, you'll beat yourself up. If you honor that you're a cat and give yourself permission to climb, you'll climb very high in your achievements.
Well, I love that, John. You're one of the words that you taught me that had the greatest impact was this principle of fair exchange. It's about, could you maybe summarize that in light of the internet? I think a lot of us, let me put a context around that. A lot of the internet, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is out of fair exchange. We sign up for things for free, which creates a debt, which we have to pay back later with interest. And I'm being a software developer. I know that this is how the world is. We've almost come to this point where people expect things to be free and they expect them to be really, really good and free. But what happens is, in order to balance the fair exchange, we have to overcharge. Whereas wouldn't it be better if we simply were in alignment with fair exchange rather than free, 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 free? I think this whole free movement of the internet, hey, give me your email address, I'll send you this gift for free. I think people are jaded by that. And there is something coming. I think it's this great balancing. And what I love about, I highly recommend everybody visit Dr. John Demartini's website. It's drdemartini.com, and go look at all of the value that's there at that website. It's an amazing website. You give away so much. Your YouTube channel has hundreds of videos on it. It's like a plethora of knowledge. But yet, out there in the world, there are these other people that are giving, and they're promising things that they can't possibly achieve for little or no money at all. and it's out of balance with fair exchange. So I just wanted to, stir the pot a little bit around this principle of, I guess my question is, how can we teach fair exchange to others and then bring fair exchange back into the internet in the realm of e-commerce? Because I feel like we're so out of balance right now as a society and as a world, and it's craving to become back into balance with fair exchange. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think you've said some you've introduced a good insight there. When we meet somebody, pardon me for developing this answer. When we meet somebody and we compare ourselves to them, and we assume and make an assumption that they are more intelligent or more successful or more financially viable or more stable in their relationship or more socially impactful or more physically fit or beautiful or more spiritually aware. The moment we put them on a pedestal and see them greater than ourselves, in turn, we tend to shrink. We tend to minimize ourselves in comparison. Whenever we do, we lose our authenticity. And this minimization of self, we tend to attempt to give altruistically as a compensation for this self-depreciation, to try to make up for this depreciation. Whenever we meet somebody that we think that we are more greater than them and they are less intelligent, less successful, less wealthy, etc., we tend to exaggerate ourselves, lose our authenticity, go into pride. And when we do, we tend to project our values onto others. So when we go into pride, we tend towards the narcissistic side, projecting on others and expecting them to live in our values. When we're in the altruistic side and shame side, we tend to sacrifice ourselves for other people. Just like in a transaction, if we feel we didn't deliver what people paid for, we go out of our way altruistically to try to compensate, to find equity. And if we feel that they didn't pay us for what we delivered, we get narcissistically and demand more pay. So nature is creating inauthenticities whenever it gets out of equity. And we lose our own equity. We don't have equanimity when we go into pride or shame. So we lose our authenticity and we lose our real self, our essential self. But the moment we have fair exchange and we don't put them on pedestals, we don't put them in pits, we put them in our heart. If we put them in the pit, we tend to be careless. If we tend to put them on a pedestal, we tend to be careful. When we put them across from us and see them as reflections with reflective awareness, we have care ring, which keeps the rings on the finger. When that occurs, we have equitable, fair exchange that creates sustainable, long-term relationships. And people that are wanting a quick get-rich scheme, they may want to go and try to give something nothing with a hidden agenda on the back. But the people that want to create a sustainable, long-term development of a culture, see, we're either subordinating to a culture or creating a culture. And if we want to create a culture, it's when we're in a state of authenticity, having equanimity, we have equity between other people, we have respectful, reflective communication with them, and we maintain fair exchange so they want to keep doing business with us. And that is the long-term brand strategy that I'd rather follow myself, that some people are not learning except through the hard way. It's been historical, it stood the test of time, that principle, but for some reason people think that the immediate gratification, the amygdala response, the immediate gratification strategy is going to be the long term, but that's not really the one that works the longest. Caring about people and humanity. I always say that since I was 20, I had a little affirmation that went through my mind that has been with me ever since. I create original ideas that serve humanity. I say that each day. I create original ideas that serve humanity. And I realize that that's the only thing that's going to sustain is truly contributing to some need out there. And the greater the problem you solve out there, the greater your life. I always say that leaders pursue challenges that inspire them and followers try to avoid challenges that despise them and then get smacked by them with distress instead of eustress. So giving yourself permission to go find something that's deeply meaningful, that's a challenge in the world that serves other people, and going and finding solutions for it directly or indirectly, and committing perseverantly, relentlessly in the pursuit of giving that to people and sharing that with people in a fair, sustainable, equitable remuneration, amazing things happen. you're abundantly rewarded and they're abundantly rewarded, and you have a non-zero sum game sustainable objective. So I'm a firm believer in pursuing that in the long run. That's the only thing that's lasted. I'd rather take my time in growing my momentum, but then once I do, the incremental momentum builds something that's unstoppable.
I love that, John. So we have now questions pouring in from the internet, and given the time that we have, I'll try to ask a few of them. We're streaming on 4 Facebook channels and 1 YouTube channel. And so people, if you're watching, now would be a time to actually ask the questions that you would like John to answer. We're getting some comments. So brilliant. They love that I create original ideas that serve humanity. And here's a question. It says, Dr. Demartini, thank you for being here. What is your personal balance between staying informed with what is happening in the world while avoiding the noise, while avoiding the noise of news and sensationalism and staying in your own focus? And then she adds, especially as an artist or writer, because I think what they're getting at is so many people out there, they see doom and gloom, they see the news, they see all this kind of stuff, and it kind of gets in the way of them expressing their creativity and their gifts in the world. And what the news shows us is it's just a tiny sliver of what's happening in the world, right? There's so much, you've said this. I remember you used to say you read a Military Digest, and there's simultaneously the equal number of declarations of war as there are declarations of peace. The world is constantly in balance. It's actually a universal law. It's not even a man-made law. So maybe you could speak to how do you keep that balance between avoiding news that's out there in the world and then also staying focused on your service to humanity, which you're constantly doing.
Okay. Can I develop that too?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I walked up to you and I said, Victor, you're always nice, you're never mean. You're always kind, you're never cruel. You're always generous, you're never stingy. You're always giving, never taking. Always positive, never negative. Always peaceful, never wrathful. Always considerate, never inconsiderate. If I said that to you, your BS meter, your intuistat would whisper to you and go, and you'd be thinking about the times you were kind of cruel and mean and negative and things like that. And you'd kind of chuckle because you go, no, that's not exactly true.
That's not true.
And then if I went to you and I said, you're always mean, you're never nice, you're always cruel, you're never kind, you're never always negative, never positive, always wrathful, never peaceful, always inconsiderate, never considerate, always stingy, never generous, always taking, never giving, your BS meter would go off again. It would go, no, that's not true. Because what you are, when you're seeing one side, you're conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downside. Or if you see the downside, you're conscious of the downside and unconscious of the other side. And anytime you judge somebody with a polarized view, which sensates the senses and initiates sensory responses, you have a skewed subjective bias interpretation of reality. And in that moment, you have uncertainty. There's no way you can have certainty that that's true about you. But if I went to you and I said, sometimes you're nice, sometimes you're mean, sometimes you're kind, sometimes you're cruel, sometimes you're positive, sometimes you're negative, sometimes you're peaceful, sometimes you're wrathful, sometimes generous, stingy, you'd go, yes, that's true. So an objective view that has some reason to it, that's more executive function, that is neutral, people can believe. So anytime you watch sensational news, you're getting skewed views to grab attention because the senses are designed for contrast. I always say the mass media is for the masses, and they lead you astray, misinformation, because it's subjective bias to grab your attention. And it's, extremes. I have very little interest in that. I fill my mind with Mortimer Adler's types of material. Right now I'm working on a book. I just read 13 books by Alfred North Whitehead, who's a great philosopher. I'd much rather put my mind into the pot of glue where I want it to stick with great ideas by great minds than transient, trivial, fads and distractions of emotional media. Now, if I go on the air, which I do a lot of media, I try my best to give something of value there. And sometimes that's not what they want. They want sensationalism. And so that's okay. But I try to give something that I know will sustain. So my advice is to fill your day with higher priority information. if you're not prioritizing your actions, you're not prioritizing your perceptions, what you fill into your sensory experiences. You're not prioritizing what you say. You're not prioritizing what you eat. And you're not taking command. You're letting the world around you extrinsically run you instead of you occur from within. I said in The Secret, when the voice and the vision on the inside is greater than all opinions on the outside, you begin to master your life. So I would say prioritize what you put into your mind. And frankly, social medias, some of them and some medias are not priority to me. So I don't spend time focusing on that. I would much rather read an Emerson and read a quality piece of literature, or go and interview somebody extraordinary. I went to the Institute of Advanced Studies and spent time with Freeman Dyson before he passed away, one of the great astrophysicists that took over Albert Einstein's position in 1955. And I wanted to go there to where Albert Einstein's office was and where he had the blackboard, where he put E equals MC squared, and I wrote my formula in there. I'd much rather spend my afternoon doing that than watch some sort of a transient, sensational, subjectively biased media that's there, not designed to make you masterful, but is actually to distract you for commercial purposes.
Yeah, speaking of sensationalism, I think you're spot on, because the YouTube world, we're streaming on one of these channels right now. I took a look at your channel, and your most popular video is about depression. And I think there's a lot of people in the world that are depressed, and they find your video somehow, probably by searching, and then something speaks to their heart and then they see it. But there are many, many, many other videos out there that do sensationalism, but they don't really have the answer to depression. I don't think there really is an answer. If someone is depressed, from my vantage point, they're not doing enough service in the world, because they're how can I say that? You can't be depressed when you're serving others. It's physically impossible. I learned that from you in the Breakthrough.
A wise statement. I define depression as a comparison of your current reality to a fantasy that you're addicted to. It's an unrealistic expectation. I found 15 common unrealistic expectations in cases of depression. I've worked with thousands of people that have clinical depression who've been told it's a biochemical imbalance. But please know this. Your neurotransmitters change in 200 milliseconds based on perceptions. They don't tell you that. The pharmaceutical industry wants you to believe it's all a biochemical imbalance and you need to fix it with some sort of pill. But if you're in a room and all of a sudden the door opens up and a 14-foot tiger comes jumping in and is about to jump and leap in the air with salivating fangs about to nibble on you, and you turn and you see it at the split second before it, if you froze that with a Men in Black pen, right before it was about to eat you, you would find out that your cortisols, the osteocalcium, norepinephrine, epinephrine would be skyrocketed, serotonin, endorphins, everything else would be dropped. You would have in 200 milliseconds a massive swap in your chemistry. And what happens is, if all of a sudden the big tiger stopped and then all of a sudden stood next to you and reached around you and hugged you and said, "I'm Tony Tiger," and you've always wanted to meet Tony Tiger because you ate Frosted Flakes or something when you were a kid, your chemistry would skew in 200 milliseconds back into a completely opposite side, where serotonin, oxytocin, and enkephalons and endorphins and dopamine would skyrocket, and the others would drop. So literally in under a second, your chemistries are changing based on what you store in your perceptions. Your subconscious mind stores all lopsided perceptions from the past and is keeping, as long as we regurgitate and keep dramatizing running our story of being a victim of history, we're going to keep having these skewed chemistries. And these chemistries are not the cause. They're not causal. They're correlative. And we've somehow robbed people of accountability of their perceptions. We have control over our perceptions, decisions, and actions in life. And if we don't learn how to master our perceptions and put realistic expectations based on our highest values that are balanced and objective, and the same for other people, depression is a feedback mechanism to let us know we're skewed in our expectations and perceptions, and it's trying to help us, actually. I actually take people, I've had thousands of people that had so-called clinical depression and were treated for it and stuff, and we've dissolved it. And people don't believe it's possible, but it is. I'm certain about it. You can dissolve this depression stuff by having them crack the fantasies and unrealistic expectations that they have on their life. If you expect to live in other people's values, you're going to beat yourself up. If you expect others to live in your values, you're going to beat them up. And you're going to have an expectation that's going to lead to anger and aggression, blame and betrayal, criticism and challenge, despair and depression, a desire to exit and escape, futility and frustration, grouchiness and grief, and hatred and hurt, and insanity and irritability. Those are the A, B, C, D, F, G, H, I's of negativity that occur spontaneously when we have unrealistic expectations on ourselves or other people. So helping people ground themselves with realistic expectations based on true values and making sure that they're not setting up fantasies of one-sided outcomes, positive without negative, happy without sad, gives them a more realistic expectation that they can ground their life by. And training people on that is what I love doing. So we have thousands of people that were clinically depressed that are no longer clinically depressed because of it.
That's right. I remember at the breakthrough experience, whether it was a book or a statement, you said, I gave up being happy because it made me too sad. Is that one of your books?
It's a book I started writing. I never published it, but we did lectures on it because I took somebody live in Sydney, Australia at the Masonic Center there one time. We had people, I said, how many of you have what you classify as depression? And man, the hands went up all over the place. I said, how many have been diagnosed clinically depressed? And I said, okay. And we pulled out 3 people and I showed them their unrealistic expectations. Do I have time to share a story? I don't know how much time.
Oh, yeah, sure. Take as long as you like.
All right. So there was a gentleman in Sydney, Australia that I met at the Swiss Hotel that had written a book on depression. He was suicidally depressed. He literally tried to commit suicide, clinically depressed, was on medication, wrote a book, then decided in that book he was going to interview celebrities that had been depressed, and that would help sell his book. And he became pretty famous for his book. I mean, he ended up getting involved in all kind of awards and stuff from this book. But it was mainly a pharmaceutical model because nothing he had tried in the so-called self-help movement, which sometimes is BS, was also helping him. So we sat down and I asked him a simple question. Do you believe that an individual like yourself committed to helping people with depression would be wise to be current and up to date with all the tools and technologies out there for doing it? He said, yes. I said, are you familiar with this particular technology that I was trying to introduce to him? And he goes, no. But he said, if I had known about it, I mean, if it's out there and it has a value, I would find out about it. I said, well, you're finding out about it. And I said, do you mind if I do a little experiment with you to show the significance of depression? He says, okay. I said, go to the moment when you were suicidal in your mind. He says, well, I'd rather not. I don't want to bring that up. I said, just appease me for a second. Just go to the moment where you were suicidal and you wanted to end your life. He goes, okay. So he goes there. And I said, now in that moment, if you're depressed, you're comparing your current reality to an expectation that's not being met. So what was the expectation that you were angry about that did not get met at that moment? And he goes, at that moment, I was really, really angry because I'd worked myself up in a company to climb up the corporate ladder. There was a position that I wanted. And right when I thought I was going to get it, they hired some external person to take it over. And because that person then felt threatened by me because more people knew me and they were an outside sourced, they did what they could to undermine me to make sure I didn't have power. And that was the end of my career as far as I was with that. And that's the career I wanted. And that's when I went into depression. And I said, okay, so that means that because you had an expectation that was unmet, you got angry and you got aggressive and you got fired because of that, because you were not working as a team and everything else. He said, yes. I said, just out of curiosity, the expectation, if you had gotten it, what would you have gotten? Well, I would have gotten, about $160,000 a year position, maybe over time, maybe $200,000 a year. And I would have had, prestige in this company and everything else. I said, okay, great. When you end up this happening and you got depressed, what was the benefit of getting depressed? He said, well, how could it be a benefit of getting depressed? I said, what's the benefit you got out of it? Didn't you get a best-selling book out of it? He goes, yeah. Did you get known by celebrities and things? Yeah. Was that one of your long-term objectives? Yeah. Did you get acknowledged by the government? Yes. Did you end up making money off that? Yes. Did you get speaking engagements off that? Definitely. I said, do you make now more than $200,000 a year? He goes, I do. I said, so if you had gone back and actually stayed in that job, would you rather have that job or what you have right now? He goes, well, that's a good point. I'd rather have what I have now. I said, so let's take a look. What's the drawbacks if you've gotten that position? I'd be working for somebody else, under somebody that I probably didn't want to work under. And I started stacking up the drawbacks of the fantasy that he had about that job position. Because he was holding on to the fantasy. As long as we hold on to the fantasy and have an unrealistic expectation I was going to have that life, and never took and looked at the downsides and challenges that would come with it, and never appreciated what actually emerged in there, you'll be holding on to a fantasy that life should have been this way, and you'll never appreciate your life. Because your comparison of what's current to what's the fantasy is self-defeating. So I actually asked him to write down the drawbacks. We wrote them down on a little napkin, and we stacked up the drawbacks if he had gone that path until he got tears of gratitude for what his life did turn to be. And then I stacked the benefits of what was going on in his life as a result of it, the impact he's had, and the new book that's coming, and the impact that he's got in his life, and the woman that he found in his life because of that impact. And he started to think, he says, I never even thought in all these years to thank the gentleman that took that position that I would have been trapped in, and the role he played in making sure that I went on to something greater. And he got tears in his eyes, and he had gratitude. And I said, now close your eyes and go back to that moment when you were depressed and you wanted to end your life. Can you see in that moment you were comparing your life to a fantasy about how you thought it was going to be, but right now you have matured to see that that is not even real. That fantasy was a fantasy. And a fantasy is something you assume's got more benefits and drawbacks. And so life becomes, in comparison to that, more drawbacks and benefits. I said, can you see right now that that gentleman just set you on a new trajectory to go do something more amazing with your life, to make a bigger difference in life? He goes, yes. Are you now grateful for that? Yes. So now try to find the depression. I said, just go try to find the depression now. He couldn't do it because the fantasy was over. And until as long as he got that fantasy, he can sit there and sulk in that depression because he's comparing that reality to the fantasy. And at the end of it, he goes, well, will that last? I said, as long as you don't have that fantasy, you're not going to have that depression. Depression is a feedback to let you know that you have an unrealistic expectation on some fantasy that you're addicted to, that's stacked up in some cases unconsciously, and it's time to wake that up. And your biochemistry and chemistry is doing exactly what it's designed to do when you live in that reality. And he goes, I have to think about this. And I said, but no, the reason why you're hesitant on it is because you're linked to the pharmaceutical industry now, and they're supporting your book, and you got an internal conflict commercially. He goes, boy, you're brutal with the way you speak. I said, yes, I am. I'm nailing it. He says, I'll have to think about that. I said, do you really care about helping people with their depression, or you want to make sure you're going to get a best-selling book and get some cash out of the pharmaceutical industry? You have to make that own decision. I'm not going to say what other way is right or wrong. It's not about a moral issue. It's about you having to live inside yourself with what's true. He said, man, I didn't know I was going to run into you today. Didn't have any idea that this was going to happen. But I said, you can't find your depression now because it's not there. You cleared the illusion that you were comparing your life to.
Wow. That was a great story. Thank you, John. And it inspired a question from the internet. So the question is, what is your recommendation for people who are holding on to a fantasy that isn't serving them and are having a hard time releasing that? How do they release that?
A fantasy is an assumption that the experiences that you're having right now has more advantages and disadvantages. A nightmare is just the opposite, more disadvantages than advantages. But just like I said with you, you don't have positives without negatives. You don't have negatives without positives. There is no such thing as a one-sided magnet. Every event in life is like a magnet. In the Buddhist teaching, the Buddhist says the desire for that which is unobtainable and the desire to avoid that which is unavoidable is a source of human suffering. So anytime you strive for one side of a magnet at the expense of the other, you have futility. It's like me giving you a magnet and said, I'll give you $1 billion if you can give me just the positive pole back. Well, if you're ignorant, you'll search and try to cut the magnet half and get only the positive pole. But you can't get that. There's no monopoles in magnetism. So the search for a monopole, a life, happy without sad, kind without cruel, positive without negative, is a marketed, utopic opium of the masses that's sold to ignorant people that are gullible enough to buy into an idea of one-sidedness without objectivity. So I don't promote that, because I find that just misleads people, and it creates self-depreciation over time, banging your head against the wall, trying to get something that's not obtainable. So finally getting to the point of you going in there and asking what exactly is the fantasy and what are the downsides, and then hold yourself accountable. Accountability means to bring your balance sheet into balance in your mind and see both sides. You know, they talk about mindfulness today, but when you're infatuated with something and you're conscious of the upside and unconscious of the downside, that's not mindful, that's half full. If you're resentful to somebody and conscious of the downsides, unconscious of the upsides, as a survival strategy, again, not mindful. But when you're aware of both sides of somebody, if I'm going to love you, Victor, I got to love both sides of you. If I'm aware of both sides and expect both sides, I can only expect you to have both sides. If I have an expectation, you're only supposed to be nice to me now, and I have a delusion, and then I'm going to feel betrayed and angry because I have an unrealistic expectation on Victor. But once I have an objective, I don't have fantasies. I have a real objective. And then once I care enough to communicate what I value in terms of what your highest values are, you feel appreciated and respected, and you'll treat me a different way. So I have the responsibility to keep myself objective, not in a fantasy land, because that depression's not an illness. I'm going to stand that strong. It's a feedback system that's biologically essential for people to break their addictions to unrealistic expectations and fantasies in life, to get them authentic, not fantasy seeking.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. See, the thing is, the challenge that people have today is if they're delivering authentic information that's balanced, it doesn't have the sensational component, and therefore these algorithms now won't share it. In other words, it's not going to show up on YouTube. It's not going to show up elsewhere. We've actually found that if you're not able to captivate someone's attention for longer than 48 seconds, they won't even show your video anymore. Yeah. It's gotten to the point that I wrote a paper on this called How to Stop People from Scrolling, because recently we saw Robert Plant, you know, the singer from Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
And I was sitting next to this lady, and she was sitting there with her phone. Let me see if I can bring up my phone. And she was scrolling through her phone so fast, it was making me dizzy. And then she would stop. And I counted to myself 1,000, 2, 1,000. Then she'd go back to scrolling at 100 miles an hour. And then she'd hit stop. 1,000, 2, 1,000. So it's almost as if I read this, maybe you can confirm this, that our brain can recognize a picture, a symbol, or an emoji in a 1/5 to a 1/10 of a second, depending upon how intelligent you are. You know, even the slowest people will recognize a symbol in a 1/5 of a second. Super fast attention people can recognize it in a 1/10 of a second. That means a logo, a brand, a face. They can recognize that in a 1/10 of a second. You then have 2 seconds to capture their attention. Then you have 15 seconds to develop their attention. You have a minute to explain what it is that you're talking about. And if you sell them on that first minute, then they may watch you for 4 minutes. And this is the world that we're now living into. And this is the challenge, because whether we like it or not, Facebook, Google, all the powers that be have built AI, artificial intelligence robots that simulate that lady sitting next to me at the Robert Plant concert. That their robots are now reading our content. They're reading this live stream. They're reading what we say, what we do, if we can get across those little milestones. And the challenge that I saw on your channel and every best-selling author's channel is that they don't know that, and they don't know that they don't know that. But now that you know that, you can now go, oh, okay, what could I say in 48 seconds that's going to get people to watch the next hour? Because I think that's I came up with a strategy. I keep it really simple. I kind of based it on writing a book. What do you do when you finish the book? You write the introduction. What do you do when you write the introduction? You reach out to a best-selling author and you ask them to write the foreword for you. What's the last thing you do? the marketing stuff on the back of the book or the inside cover. And what we now need to do on our videos and in our presentations, especially when we master them, we upload them to YouTube, we've got to somehow summarize this entire conversation into 48 seconds. And then put that on at the beginning of the video to capture people's attention so that other people will see it. And some of my colleagues in YouTube, they call it the bracelet and charms. You have a bracelet, you know, those hippie bracelets that people have little beads around them. You want to think of your entire bracelet is your 1 hour talk, like this interview. And then there are these 1 minute charms that capture people's attention on different topics. Like we talked about depression. We talked about best-selling authors. We talked about fantasy. We talked about fair exchange. Is that something that you think could be taught to people? Is how do we say our point in 15 seconds? How do we say our point in 1 minute? How do we capture people's attention in a fifth of a second? What do you think, John?
Oh God, you want to go down the rabbit hole in that one?
I actually do. I would love to do a case study with you to see if we could double your YouTube channel in like 30 days, something crazy like that.
Well, I don't really put any focus on that myself. I just research. I'm only interested in researching what'll stand the test of time and putting it out there. And Seneca says you measure an individual by their most distant ends, not their immediate gratifications. So I'm thinking in terms of generations, not just now.
Wow.
I also realize, and I'm going to build this if you don't mind. In elementary school, there was, in the science class, in most science classes, there was a picture of a hydrogen atom, little ball, and then helium, and then lithium, and beryllium, and boron, etc., and all the way up to uranium. And each one had a progressively larger sphere. And so in elementary school, you're taught, you assume, and you get these little stick pictures and balls, and you put these little models together, and you think atoms are balls. So while you're in elementary school, an atom is a ball. Then you get to high school, and you find about, you know, the Bohr model, and you find out, no, it's a neutron proton with little electrons going around. It looks like a little solar system. And then you went, but it's in shells, in the orbitals, and so they make up spheres, and so that's why it's a sphere. And then you realize it's a little bit of an abstraction, but it's closer to what's going on. And then you go on to college, and you find out, no, that's not it either. It's actually probability distributions of complex mathematical numbers dealing with a square root of -1 in a Schrodinger's equation, and it's probability mathematics, and it's just the probability of some electron being in those locations, and the electron is some sort of point thing that's an infinitesimal, that not even real, and it's just an abstraction mathematically, and there's not even a ball there. And then you go, wait a minute, now let's go on now to PhD and get our PhD in atomic nuclear physics, and then we find out that there's flaws in those models. They're just models. And they don't really, the real truth is way more abstract than that. And it's an energy game. And it's the probability of interacting fields and things. And so we had to be taught the illusion until we're ready for truth. And that's what the Buddha said. The Buddha said, I will teach my students the illusion until they're ready for truth. And we'll do it in gradations. Now, the little ball is for the simple-minded. The people that are a little bit more complex, they're more looking at the abstractions. And our IQ and EQ is based on the levels of abstraction we can honor. So I look now at the market. Who do I want as a market? Do I want many people that have little influence? Do I want a few people that have massive influence? Do I want the intelligentsia, or do I want the ignorant? Do I want sensation? If I want the ignorant, I have to go to the amygdala, and I have to create sensational systems that are quick, immediate, gratifying systems. But if I do, they're going to be addicted to one side. They're not going to be interested in the truth. They're going to be interested in sensationalism. That which circulates the most has the least value, as they say. If I want somebody that's got an impact, a CEO that's going to have an impact on 10,000 people, it's going to have an impact on millions of dollars and billions of dollars, I may have to work at another level of education. So first you need to ask yourself, who is your target? Who are you trying to reach? Are you trying to reach the masses? Or are you trying to reach the masses indirectly through leaders? What's your objective? And then what exactly is the information you want? And what do you want as a brand? Now, if I was speaking to Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, I wouldn't be doing sensational, get rich overnight quick games. That's a fantasy. They'd walk right out. If I was going to somebody who had no money and was constantly gambling their money away, they would run to that and go buy the $49.95 multi-billion-dollar overnight sensational thing. Ignorant people would run to the back of the table and buy that. So you have to ask yourself, in your own integrity, where do you want to play in the game of life? Frankly, the sensational, immediate gratifying things aren't my game. I don't pay attention to them. I focus on classical information that will stand the test of time and people. I believe that the authentic individual inside has an intuition that's leading them to the truth inside objectively. And their facades and personas and masks that they get caught in the personal development journey, they have that and they get sidetracked by it. But deep inside the core of a human being, there's a wisdom inside that they know there's something when you deliver it, and you deliver it with integrity. And so they are led through the sensationalism. And eventually, as Dirac said, it's not that we don't know so much, we know so much that isn't so. And so we go through and we filter through that and eventually bang our head against those sensationalisms until eventually our intuition leads us to my class. And I just keep delivering. And I've been delivering 48 years. And
you have. You over deliver. I mean, I still remember the day. I don't know if I told you the story, but when I met you, I was going through a really rough time in my life. I didn't have the money for the breakthrough experience. I went to a friend. I borrowed the money. I flew to Honolulu. I did the breakthrough experience with you. And then immediately there, I met some people and we did some business. I generated the money and I paid back the person. And one of the things I learned is that, when you borrow money, you need to pay it back with interest. So they were not expecting me to give them back the money. They had plenty of money. They didn't need it. They were certainly not expecting me to insist on paying them back more than what I borrowed from, which I did. And that's one of the things I learned from you. And I think a lot of people have this fantasy about life and business that they just don't get it. So I encourage everyone to go take a class with Dr. John. If you are struggling with money or anything like that, you want to take this class because I wasn't expecting this, but my first class, I worked my entire breakthrough experience with my father, and I dealt with that issue, and my relationship was reborn with my father because of your class. And thank you, John. And the second time I did the breakthrough experience, I did it about my mother, and she recently passed away, and it allowed me to help with the grieving process. And I recorded a piano album. I actually performed it live for her as she was dying. And she was, the last sounds that she heard was me playing piano to her. And so, you said what my dream and my vision is. Honestly, I would love to just become a philanthropist and share my music to people who are crossing over, put them in hospice centers. But there's this problem that it's in the back of my mind with fair exchange. It's like, okay, well, how do I get this music into the hospice center? They have to pay for it. They don't want to pay for it. They already have that canned music that's playing, over the PA system. I have to donate it to them. For that, I need money. And for that money, it goes back to fair exchange. So I think a lot of us it's almost like a rabbit doing a backflip. Another rabbit does a backflip. So when you're like, you don't give away the breakthrough experience, you charge for that. And you haven't increased the price, I don't think, at all. It's always maintained the same value. Are you doing them virtually then, right now still? Or are you about to do them physically again?
Well, both. We'll probably do physical by the third quarter, fourth quarter. But we've been doing it since March. We've been doing online programs and breakthroughs. And I've been grateful. It's working. We do it slightly different, but the breakout sections are just like we do when we're doing live presentations and breakouts. And I hold people accountable and right on the Zoom, and they're right there in my faces with the Zoom. And so, we've been able to do the breakthrough experience both ways. I like them both ways. There's benefits and advantages and disadvantages both ways. So I don't let anything stop me from my mission. That's the best way I say it. COVID doesn't stop me.
That's a good attitude to have.
Yeah, I always say that the master is the one that takes whatever's there and asks, how is it helping me fulfill my mission? And then answers that question until they're grateful and then move forward. It's never the world on the outside that determines it. It's how committed you are on the inside. If you're inspired by something, you have a reason for doing something so big, these so-called obstacles become opportunities. That's simple.
The obstacles become opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer that you want to prioritize your daily actions and absolutely look at what is the highest priority action. I've been doing that. I've been clear about that since I was 27. Mine is research, write, travel, teach. That's it. I don't do anything else. I stick to that basic thing. That my state of my mission book says it really clear. Let's see if I can get there.
Research, yeah, there you go.
Teach. So I don't waste my time. I don't do anything other than what's highest on my priority. I haven't cooked since I was 24. Let's see if I get my camera better. I haven't cooked since I was 24. I haven't driven a car in over 30 years. People say, they call me Mr. Delegator. Even if I go to my girlfriend, I said, look, if I could delegate lovemaking to Hugh Jackman or Brad Pitt or Gerard Butler or someone like that, if I could get them to make love with you on my behalf, would you still love me? And every time they said, I would love you even more. So delegation has a place. That's supposed to be fun. But anything that's low in my values, anytime you're doing high priority things, you grow in self-worth. Anytime you do low priority things, you lower your self-worth. So I don't waste my time on things that aren't inspiring to me.
Well, thank you for inspiring our audience, and I'm certain that many people will see this interview over the coming months and years. It'll be timeless, as another author would say. Well, thank you, John. Anything you'd like to say in closing to our fans and our audience? And would you be open to doing another interview sometime with maybe a little bit more advanced notice? I could bring a much bigger audience here.
Sure. Be glad to do it. You know that. I love sharing ideas that will be, hopefully impactful for people. So yeah, certainly anytime. The thing I would say, pardon me for having a blurry camera. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe if I hit my camera a second here and get back, maybe that'll come back. No. As I said earlier, you got to give yourself permission to be you. And I try to help people find out what they value most in life, because the very highest value their life and identity revolves around. Finding out what's truly most important in your life, most deeply meaningful, most inspiring, most authentic, that you can't wait to get up in the morning and do, that you spontaneously desire to do it. And I don't mean some fantasy, but I mean something that's really deeply committed to doing. And then you find a way of serving people through that. You won't have Monday morning blues, Wednesday hump days, thank God it's Fridays and week friggin' ends. You'll have a life of inspiration, not desperation. So I'm a firm believer of giving yourself permission to do something extraordinary on planet Earth that is deeply called for within you, that contributes and serves, that's original, that's you, as an unborrowed visionary, not a borrowed visionary, not conforming, but norming, and giving yourself permission to do that. That makes a difference in your life, and you'll exemplify what's possible and inspire other people to do the same in their life with a chain reaction. A ripple effect and a momentum building, incremental momentum building legacy will be born if you do so. So that's it. Just give yourself permission to shine, not shrink, and to radiate, not gravitate, and to go out and do something that contributes. Instead of sitting there being victims of history, be a master of destiny.
Well, thank you, John, for this wonderful interview. And I will let you know that if you want to connect with John, go to drdemartini.com. And I highly recommend you sign up with one of his online programs and courses. He teaches all the time. Such a privilege and an honor to have you share your wisdom with us. Thank you again, John.
No, thank you for doing it. It's great to see you. And whoever's listening out there, may you do something extraordinary with your life. I hope that somehow this little interview was helpful in that direction.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.